EA has had to backtrack on some of their microtransaction decisions in their latest titles. Most notably, Star Wars Battlefront 2 has had their microtransactions completely disabled temporarily. They say they're looking into player feedback and what they can do to make it more rewarding and yada yada, but we all know that the real case is basically they're doing this for damage control, and they're probably just going to add them back in later once the release period is done, and they're still just going to continue being jerks about it. But we could actually see some signs for the future to where we might actually see this take a little bit of a nosedive, because the AAA game industry has been going towards these loot boxes and trying to make money off of them in very exploitative ways for quite a while now, and I'm kind of sick of it, quite frankly. Michael here with another topic video. So if you haven't been following the news recently on this sort of controversy, basically EA has finally taken loot boxes too far. They actually made it so that basically people that don't know anything about game design were making game design decisions, and the entire progression systems in Battlefront 2 and apparently a new Need for Speed game, which I didn't even know a new Need for Speed game came out. I quite frankly stopped caring about Need for Speed years ago because EA kind of killed the series, so yeah, didn't even know about that one. But basically, yeah, their entire progression system and a lot of the power and stuff like that, for some reason it wouldn't let me take the other pathway. That was kind of jerkish in this game. But the entire progression system and a lot of the power and stuff like that that the characters have and players have in multiplayer as well basically is all derived on loot boxes, which of course you can pay money for, which actually adds in a bunch of pay-to-win elements and kind of screws over a lot of the sort of enjoyment that could come out of the game, especially when it comes down to unlocking things and unlocking new content. And they're also supposedly extremely grindy if you're not paying for these loot boxes, which is pretty bad, so players are fairly outraged. Now, EA has decided to kind of start backpedaling on these two games specifically. So Need for Speed has recently said that they're, oh yeah, we're going to be looking into this sort of stuff. And they've also removed the microtransactions completely from Battlefront 2 temporarily. Now, they're actually not doing this to be good guys or anything like that. They're not going to go in and be like, oh, hey, we need to like make it so that players are enjoying the game. They don't care. They just do not care whatsoever if you're enjoying their game or not. They just want money. And so what they're actually looking at doing is kind of making it so that their stocks don't fall to an all-time low, because right now, if you've been paying attention to the stock market, EA has lost a lot of stocks. Basically, their stock value has fallen down just for the simple fact that people are making an outrage about these loot boxes. And it's just because they completely ruined any sort of enjoyment that could come out of these games for most people. And there are some people that don't care about the loot boxes. There's some people that are trying to defend them. But quite frankly, what ended up happening is that there are people that don't know anything about game design going into the game and being like, oh, well, we need loot boxes and we need them to sell. And so the entire game's progression system is based off of these loot boxes, and since you can buy them, they had to make it grindy. And so basically, if you're not buying these loot boxes, it takes forever to unlock everything, and it's just not an enjoyable experience. And so basically what they're doing is they're doing damage control, not only for their players, because hey, they're going to be able to get some extra sales from this, but quite frankly, that's not what they're worried about. They're worried about their investors, and they actually released a statement out to their investors today. Investors and stockholders, I should say, basically saying like, oh, well, this won't affect our long-time earnings. This won't affect our material earnings, as they call it. It's basically long-term earnings or the ultimate value of said product. And so they're saying like, oh, hey, this is going to be better for the future and everything like that. And technically, they might not be wrong, because after this period, they're probably just going to add them back in just like they were, and that's where they're going to end up making their money anyways, because people are going to end up picking it up later, or they're going to end up going in and being like, oh, hey, well, they're not that bad, right? Because they're going to make worse ones later on, or somebody else is going to come along, like Ubisoft or something like that, is going to come along and make worse ones, and then the controversy won't seem as bad, and then everyone's just going to be like, whatever, it's not that pay to win in comparison to this one. And that's how the AAA game industry has been kind of getting away with this. And so, yeah, so why is this actually pretty bad, but also why is this a good thing? Now, it's a good thing for one, because basically they actually made an impact. People's complaints have actually gotten so large to where basically in these systems that are designed to manipulate people into buying loot boxes, basically saying like, hey, don't play our game, instead pay money so that you can play different bits of content. And the annoying part is, I should actually mention about the whole grindy aspect of it, the entire reason why this ended up blowing up so bad is a great example is that one of the characters in Star Wars Battlefront 2 is Darth Vader, which is pretty iconic, and apparently it takes 40 hours to unlock him. Now, some people have been like, oh, playing a game for 40 hours? Well, it's supposed to be a big multiplayer FPS. Of course it's going to take 40 hours to get like one of the end-game unlockables. Here's the thing, though. That's 40 hours without unlocking absolutely everything. This is a bad thing because basically that progression system shows that you need to unlock any sort of loot box to actually progress and unlock any sort of style of content. And if you wanted to unlock something like, let's say, Darth Vader, you would actually have to go through without buying any loot boxes for 40 hours, which means you would get absolutely no progression and no alterations. I can't think of a single game to where I've done exactly the same thing over and over again for 40 freaking hours. That's kind of ridiculous. Also, I was just looking for the rings in this level and I found them, so I'm happy about that. So yeah, basically, it's a good thing because it's showing that players actually do have a voice, but it's a bad thing because I don't necessarily know if it's actually going to affect things in the long term. We've seen several moments of this sort of thing going on, and we've actually seen a lot of sort of backlash towards these sort of systems. And no, it hasn't been as bad. It hasn't been something like Star Wars, but at the same time, we still have games that are going to be ruined by this sort of business model. We had Shadow of War, for example, which a lot of people thought was actually a fairly decent game, but it was completely ruined by the simple fact that they had these loot boxes that you could get orcs in, which was their entire nemesis system. And so having that in their game actually completely ruined the entire... Oh, this is an SOS mission. I'm gonna go ahead and give up because I don't want to play as random bunny girl. I want to play as my character. Sorry, I'm playing Sonic Forces in the background. And so we're gonna see quite a bit more of it. But I'm glad that we finally got to a point. We actually got to a point to where it was too much fairly quickly. If you think about back in DLC and stuff like that, we're seeing them still kind of stretch the limits on DLC. And we haven't really seen any big publishers have to like backtrack on DLC very often. And DLC is pretty outrageous. You know, the base price for games and stuff like that, which people have been saying like, oh, games are expensive to develop, so they need these microtransactions. They don't. They do not need microtransactions to make money. If these large corporations are making games and like, oh, we can't fund our game without having hundreds and hundreds of dollars of an uncapped spending limit on these games, then they need new people making decisions, because that is a terrible business strategy. Like, that is not how you should run your business. You should only run off of guaranteed prices. And so, you know, it's kind of like when Square Enix made the Tomb Raider remake, which was actually fantastic and one of my favorite games in the AAA market over the last few years. And no, it wasn't, you know, Tomb Raider necessarily, but at the same time, it was good. They also needed to make millions off of that game. And they're like, hey, we need to like look at how we're, you know, building these sorts of games. Because if you're expecting these games to make infinite amounts of money and you're putting in infinite amounts of money into development, that's just not intelligent whatsoever. You need to have a limit. You need to have a budget. And these big companies, if they're actually smart, don't need that. Now, obviously, they're showing that they're not necessarily smart, but at the same time, you got to give them some benefit of the doubt. They've got some intelligence somewhere, and they know that, you know, oh, hey, we can't rely on this business model forever. And so, yeah, no, they do not need these infinite microtransactions to fund their games. So please stop saying that. It's not true whatsoever. And it's very annoying to see that argument made over and over again, because basically, if they do need these microtransactions, they're failing at their job and they should hire new higher reps, which would actually be a good thing for most people. But regardless, yeah, DLC we're still seeing the limits of, but with this whole loot box thing, it's actually only been like a year since loot boxes have been like a huge thing in AAA games. I mean, loot boxes have been a thing for a very long time. We've actually seen the concept of loot boxes in games since, for as long as I can remember. There's been randomized loot in games forever, and that's basically exactly the same sort of system, and they basically took it into this loot box system. But it's only been like a year since we've actually seen it in a lot of these AAA titles and actually been exploitative and used in these such ways. And it only took a year to actually get to a cap to where everyone's like, all right, no, we're done with this, and has actually affected a company in a large way. Because I can't think of a situation where DLC has actually affected companies in a big way. And so I think this is a good sign in the future that we probably won't see these loot boxes very much longer. We will see them for a while, and we will see them in various forms. There's going to be games like Overwatch all the time with just cosmetics or whatever, which I slightly disagree with that, but at the same time, I mean, you got to pick your battles. You can't really just go out and be like, I need to have every single loot box ever destroyed and stuff like that, because I'm not against loot boxes, but at the same time, I don't really necessarily like Overwatch's system either. I can talk about that in another video one of these days, but yeah, I like to unlock cosmetics, and I feel like cosmetics are a huge part of the game. Did I find ring number 3? I think I did, and I just skipped it, and I just collected it and didn't even think of it. Oh, never mind, I died. So yeah, we're going to be seeing those systems, but this is the cap. And so now that this has actually happened, a lot of other companies are going to be looking at this. And so these are people that don't know anything about game design. So they're not going to be like, oh, well, we could design it this way, and then it would actually make sense. No, they're just going to be like, all right, well, loot boxes are bad now, so let's not do it. There's number 3. I did grab number 3 and just didn't realize it was number 3. All right, anyways, I'm just collecting the extra collectibles in Sonic Forces. So yeah, basically these big guys, these big wigs that are making these big financial decisions and basically ruining games in the process, they're going to be looking at this and being like, oh, well, loot boxes don't work anymore, so let's go ahead and move to something else. And so we're going to be seeing the next big controversy coming out soon, and I'm really scared for what it is because games are already pretty dang expensive when it comes down to the AAA market, to the point where I just do not play them whatsoever. And so yeah, I'm kind of scared of what this is going to come up with next, but at the same time, I think that the whole pay-to-win loot box thing is going to see some wayside. We're not going to be seeing it a bunch, and it's basically going to kind of cap out at this. We're going to see some situations to where it kind of shreds the line, and some publishers are going to end up pushing it and stuff like that, but at the same time, like, this is as far as it's probably ever going to get, which is good, in my opinion. And it didn't take very long, and so it didn't end up ruining a lot of games in the future, because one thing that we've actually seen a lot with, like, you know, when season passes came out and they had the whole online passes, there's some games that you just can't play online anymore because basically the online storefront where you would buy the online game passes just don't work anymore, or there's content that was locked behind paywalls that you can no longer get anymore. And sure, these are older games, but at the same time, in a game preservation sense, that was a terrible model and a terrible system. And these loot boxes maybe aren't as bad in that sense, because these loot boxes do contain in-way exploitable systems that you could just kind of cheat to get around, which people have already done in Shadow of War, and you can actually do it in Star Wars Battlefront as well. But at the same time, you know, I'm not going to talk about how you would do that, but at the same time, you know, it is something that could be looked around and kind of cheated out if this ended up becoming a problem. But it is a multiplayer FPS. I don't think people are going to be too concerned about that. So yeah, ultimately, I think it's a good thing that this is happening, but at the same time, don't think that it's ever going to fix anything. It's going to show a cap for how far publishers can go, but they're actually still going pretty dang far. We're seeing these games just kind of absolutely ruined, and the thing that scares me about this is it shows how powerful these big corporations are in decisions like this. And so basically, if you ask any sort of designer that actually looks at a loot system and be like, hey, we're going to make it so that we could sell loot boxes, they would never want to end up putting in sort of gameplay advantages unless they had some sort of monetary kind of incentive like these big publishers do, because basically it's just not a fun, rewarding system. And so if you end up looking at these systems, it's like if somebody from game design would look at that and they'd be like, all right, well, that's not really fun because you're not actually earning anything. You're earning these boxes, and these boxes are just going to be completely random stuff. And so it doesn't actually feel like you're progressing with anything. And this is one of people's major complaints with Battlefront 2 and the new Need for Speed as well, although I've seen very little coverage for that one. I think people just kind of like left it because basically, long story short, people stopped caring about Need for Speed for quite a while now, but I did see some coverage of it and stuff like that, and people were just saying the progression system just isn't fun. Loot boxes are not a fun system. I have not thought of any game that has actually had a fun loot system for loot boxes, except for League of Legends, I would say, and that's just because I look at it as a very casual thing, and just kind of like, oh yeah, I can casually get some skins on the way, and they actually promote you to do better and stuff, and so they reward you with loot boxes when you perform well and stuff like that, which I think is a great way to do that system. But the main problem with this is that they're actually using it now to design it as the core system, because in these other sides of games that we actually see it in, like let's say Overwatch, for example, or League of Legends, or any of those sort of other gacha systems that we've seen in the past, these microtransactions have always been supplementary. They've been like things like, oh, hey, you can get some extra cosmetics, or maybe it's something like, oh, hey, you want to like not have to grind so far, you know, here's some XP boost inside this box or something. And those are the systems that we've sort of learned to be okay with, and I think they're perfectly fine, and I think they're great ways to kind of add in monetarization to free-to-play games. Maybe not AAA games, although I do, you know, agree that if they decided to move away from DLC and stuff like that, maybe microtransactions would be a way to kind of fund long-term multiplayer experiences, but at the same time, I don't feel that they should have both. But at the same time, you know, it's one of those situations to where we could end up seeing this sort of go in the wrong direction, to where now these big publishers are going to be forcing developers to make it their core system and make it so these games, instead of microtransactions being supplementary, being mandatory. Because in the system, like in Battlefront 2, basically you have to use loot boxes to progress in the game no matter what. And so you have to use them for new mechanics and things like that. And you can get credits and things like that to unlock certain things. And so it's not like, you know, just the loot boxes, but the loot boxes is the primary way of advancing. And in Hot Pursuit, or not Hot Pursuit, sorry, Need for Speed, whenever I think Need for Speed, I think of the old Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. And so I'm sorry if I did that on accident a few times in this video. I just automatically associate with that because that's where I started with that whole series. But yeah, we're seeing it so that basically the system is the only way to progress, and it's just not a rewarding system. When it's supplementary, it can be great because it's just like, oh, hey, I get this random burst of like extra progression, or I just get this sort of burst of like, I don't know what this is, but basically it was just kind of useless. But whatever, it was just an extra box and doesn't actually affect my main progression. It's much more rewarding when loot boxes are supplementary, like in Overwatch, to where basically you're looking at it, it's like, oh, hey, it's some extra cosmetics that I don't have to pay for, sort of thing. Although I do hate Overwatch's system just because you can't buy cosmetics, but that's a topic for another video. But yeah, anyways, make sure to leave your comments in the below section. I completely screwed that up. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. And of course, my other styles of content. If you have any other thoughts about this topic and stuff like that, I have not personally played the new Need for Speed, and I really didn't care about the Battlefront 2 stuff either. So basically, I'm not necessarily the kind of market for this game regardless, and so I wasn't going to pick it up anyways, but I have been following this news quite closely and following in all the design elements and kind of looking at developers, and I have noticed over the last little while the developers have been getting quieter and quieter about loot boxes, and I think it's because publishers are putting more emphasis on those systems and making it so that they're more mandatory. And I think a lot of developers, especially AAA, don't want to kind of rock the boat too far, because if they do, basically they lose their job sort of system, and it's not particularly great. We saw this with DLC and stuff like that, and somewhat questionable expansions back in the day, and now we're just seeing it with loot boxes, and it's going to be happening with every single system they end up coming up with, which is unfortunate. And I really hate that the game industry is in a situation that, whoa, I barely made that. I really hate that the game industry is in a situation, in the AAA at least, that basically AAAs are like, hey, we need to like do as much as we can until a big controversy happens, and then we'll backpedal. Like, I really hate that it's gotten to that point. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Game in the background has been Sonic Forces. I did a full review of it. It's a fun game. I'm going through and grabbing all the collectibles now. I have put in more game than this game is worth, or yeah, more than this game is worth probably, because I like Sonic, and this game is actually fun. And in retrospect of my review, I was a little bit more harsh than I think I should have been on certain aspects. And the fact that, I think other reviewers have actually said this quite a bit often, and I didn't necessarily make it clear in my review, but the high points of this game are not particularly as high as other Sonic games have ever been. But the low points have actually been nowhere near as low as other Sonic games have been in the past. And so it's actually just been an enjoyable experience throughout, instead of having like, this is enjoyable and then this is frustrating. I mean, there is one 2D Sonic level that I don't necessarily ever want to play again. That's because I had to do a time trial and I had to play it like 70 freaking times just to get the time trial done, which some of the time trials are actually kind of challenging in this, which was kind of nice. I kind of like that aspect. I like a little bit of challenge in my games. But yeah, I'm just going through and getting all the collectibles. But yeah, like I said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And I am playing as an albino hedgehog with a dress, because you get to make your own character in this game. Check out my review of it, please. It's not doing particularly well, and I thought I did a good job on it, and I would like some feedback. If you ever got feedback for these videos, sorry, this one's a little bit rambly. I just woke up and my brain is a little bit confused. And so there you go. Bing. Did they really just put the collectibles in the same spot a second time? God damn it. I'm like sitting here praising this game, and then they do something like that and I missed it. God damn it.